I'll start with a question. Why do we study history? We learn history for a variety of reasons, but one of the bigger factors is so that we can learn from the past and to also kind of contextualize our present day events to understand why it happened, because events don't arise from nothing. It's usually a reaction to past events or some kind of reinforcement of past events. So it's all connected. And by learning history, we can take actions based on the events that happened in the past, right? And I think it's similar when it comes to philosophy. It helps to contextualize the thoughts that we have today because ideas don't arise from nothingness, right? It's always a reaction or an evolution of past ideas. I think a lot, especially in Western countries, religion has had a significant influence on the way we see the world, the values, beliefs that we have. And by learning about philosophy, how we've come to think in today's world, I feel like it makes us aware of potential biases that we might have, make us aware of maybe some of the pre-programmed thought processes that we've adapted or internalized without us even recognizing. And it also serves as a nice, I guess, reference for different ideas and can also encourage us to consider the different ways of thought. So to kind of illustrate this point, I'll kind of draw a diagram. So we're going to examine modern philosophy, and this includes Continental Rationalism, British Empiricism, and German Idealism. And how modern philosophy evolves in the next few centuries is it becomes ideas like Marxism. Obviously, Marxism has had significant impact and still continues to have significant impact on geopolitics. Obviously, there's a continued tension between Russia, China, and other former communist states, former and current communist states. And that can be traced back to German idealism, actually. Also, things like existentialism, things like pragmatism, and this kind of influences modern day psychology and linguistics. The main ideas of continental rationalism is that we have a innate ability to reason, and the way we obtain knowledge is through reason. It also emphasizes deductive thinking, so using reason to come up with a overarching principle and applying that to our world to better understand it. Think about mathematical theorems, physics, laws of physics, and it also wanted to separate mind and body. So if you remember from Descartes' lecture, he suggested that we can't be certain of the existence of our body and our perception, but we can be certain of the existence of our mind because we're able to question our existence, and that in and of itself is proof that we exist, at least our skeptical mind exists. So there's a bit of separation between the mind and the body. British empiricism, it's kind of the flip side of the coin. Our knowledge is obtained through experience. That's the main thing. So we actually start off as blank slates. So we're not necessarily born with any innate abilities or skills or ability to reason, but through experience we're able to learn from that. And by using observational studies, we're able to acquire knowledge that way. And yeah, it uses inductive thinking. Inductive thinking, deductive thinking are kind of two sides of a coin. Deductive thinking, you start with a theorem, right? You establish a theorem like math and physics and you apply it. Inductive thinking is more like biology. It's more based on observation. So if you see certain cells react to a medication and you observe that enough times, you can kind of assume that it's going to keep occurring. But from our point of view, both seem to make sense, right? Both seem to be valid ways of gathering knowledge. Especially by seeing people do math or biology, they're kind of contrasting ways of acquiring knowledge, but they still both work from our perspective. But back then, people didn't really know. It was, they were coming out of time where religious thoughts dominated, and it still did, but they were starting to realize, hey, maybe there's other ways to acquire knowledge rather than just using God as explanation for the knowledge. So they're trying to figure out what are ways that we can gather knowledge, right? So one party from continental Europe, they're saying, hey, we could use our reasoning abilities, break questions down into small bits, use reason to apply kind of mathematical reasoning to acquire knowledge. And in Britain, British empiricism emphasized using experience to obtain knowledge. So these seem to be two valid ways of thinking. And why do we think that today? That's because of German idealism. German idealism was started by a guy named Kant, and he was kind of stuck between Continental rationalistic ways of thinking and British empiricistic way of thinking. Both seem to be valid ways of thinking. Could it be that they somehow complement each other, or could it be that the way we're seeing the world is just we're just looking at, trying to gather knowledge from the wrong perspective? So he was trying to figure out a way to kind of merge the two ideas. So his goal was kind of bring together the two elements and to kind of have a way of thinking that incorporates both ideas. So this is where Kant comes up with this idea called transcendental idealism. And it's kind of interesting. Essentially what transcendental idealism seeks to explain is how are we able to use experience to understand the world, but how is it that we also have reason? Essentially, he argues that instead of the world existing before our mind, the mind actually exists before the world. What that means is that the world that we perceive and can experience and understand is molded by our mind. There's obviously biological limitations, and even if you think about different animals are going to perceive the world in a different way, right? There's no guarantee that the colors that a cat sees is going to be the same as the colors that we see. We just perceive certain wavelengths as being a certain color, but that wavelength doesn't inherently have that color. It's just our mind has a filter, and it kind of molds the world based on our experiences, our biology, etc. Just because we perceive something a certain way, is that really a accurate representation of reality, right? There's no guarantee, and there's just no way for us to fully understand and perceive reality or the universe in its rawest form, because we have biological limitations and because our experiences will kind of affect the way that we see the world. To kind of break that down even further, there's things like, obviously, culture plays a role. On a more personal level, culture plays a role in how we engage with others, how we evaluate others, or how we interpret the way that other people behave, right? Similarly, language also has a role on the way that we see the world. There's a whole branch called linguistic relativity, where it's a branch of psychology that studies how language changes the way that we perceive the world. So from that, we could see that experience and our biology really puts kind of like a limitation on what we can see, or in other words, our mind kind of creates reality based on its abilities and experiences. So if I draw a diagram, I guess there's the mind and reality here. That's my understanding. And how this is significant is it was kind of like a different perspective on trying to understand how we perceive reality. Continental rationalists and British empiricists both thought that whatever world that we could perceive existed before our mind. So it was kind of a switch in perspective. Kant was arguing that the mind actually existed before reality, and the reality that we can see is kind of created by our mind. Right. So from this, and based on that reality that we can perceive, we can use reason as well as also experience to better understand the reality that we are able to perceive. So you can see how he's able to kind of combine continental rationalistic ways of gathering knowledge by using reason, but it's also using British empiricist way of attaining knowledge, which is through observation. He says that the universe that we can see is shaped by our experiences, but we can also use reason within that universe that we can perceive to better understand that.